The first international football match was played between England and Scotland at Hamilton Crescent back in November 1872, as 4,000 spectators watched history being made, but didn't witness the net bulge, as the game ended in a 0-0 draw. It took around 3 decades and the turn of the century for national teams to start cropping up outside of the British Isles, and it was in the year 1900 that football was first included as an Olympic sport. The FIFA World Cup was introduced in 1930, after which point it would become much easier to identify the finest national teams in the world every 4 years, since they would all come together at one competition. However, that still wasn't really the case up until the 1950s due to political, economic, and diplomatic disagreements, meaning the first half of this list requires a fair amount of speculation. Just to be clear, this is a video on the best national football team over the course of a 10-year period in each decade from the 1870s to the 2010s, not the team who achieved the highest peak in each decade. Consistency, results, talent, and trophies are all taken into account, and I should apologise to the subscriber who suggested this video, as I've forgotten your name, even though you most assuredly deserve a shout out. This is the kind of video that I love to make. Here is the best national football team of every decade from the 1870s to the 2010s. 1870s, Scotland. Now, I will try to keep it short and sweet with these early decades since there is so little competition, particularly the first 3 or 4, in which it is simply a case of England versus Scotland. The rival nations faced each other 8 times in official internationals during the 1870s, with Scotland winning 4 of those ties, England winning 2, and naturally, the other 2 ending all square. Scotland's 2 greatest players of the decade were probably Billy McKinnon and Henry McNeill, and between them, they scored 9 goals in 5 games against the English. 1880s, Scotland. Scotland once again ruled the roost during the 1880s as Wales and Ireland entered the international scene but were routinely thrashed by their more esteemed neighbours. England and Scotland met exactly 10 times in the 1880s, with Scotland reigning supreme on 7 occasions and losing only once, with their fine form largely being attributed to their team play and passing approach, whilst the English players played more as individuals. This decade also saw the birth of the British Home Championships, the world's first international football tournament. 1890s, England. England had learnt their lesson a little bit tactically by the 1890s, and the old enemy started to get the better of the Scots on a regular basis. England had some of football's earliest stars like Steve Bloomer, John Goodall, and Gilbert Oswald-Smith at their disposal in this decade, and in their 10 meetings with Scotland during the decade, they came out on top 6 times and lost only twice. The Three Lions also beat Wales 9-1 and Ireland 13-2 during the 1890s. 1900s, England. Although new national teams did start to crop up in the 1900s, none were any match for the English or Scots at this early stage. England first faced non-home nation opponents in 1908, as Austria were dispatched 6-1 and 11-1, whilst Hungary were beaten 7-0. They once again played Scotland 10 times, winning 3 and losing 2, so there was very little to split the 2 nations when they played each other. England were much more convincing against their other opposition though, dominating the British Home Championships as the Scots recorded losses against both Wales and Ireland. 1910s, Scotland. There wasn't an awful lot of international football played during the 1910s, as the First World War broke out in 1914 and football didn't really return until 1920. England lost to Ireland for the first time in 1913, whilst England and Scotland only faced each other 5 times, Scotland winning 2 to England's 1. I'm sure you're all ready for some other national teams to start entering now. 1920s, Uruguay. Yippee! England and Scotland finally started to play some more exotic opponents in the 1920s, although Spain were the only ones to really inflict any damage on the Three Lions. It's quite possible that England and Scotland were still the best national teams on earth during the 1920s. In fact, there's a very good reason to believe they were, but Great Britain didn't enter a team for either the 1924 or 1928 Olympics, and they only would have entered amateur players even if they had. In their absence, we have no choice but to crown Uruguay as the greatest national team of the 1920s. With the best player in the world in Jose Andrade running the show, alongside stars like Hector Scarone and Jose Nasazi, La Celeste were without peer, blowing the opposition away to win 2 gold medals, hence the 4 stars on the Uruguay shirt today. 1930s, Italy. Again, England and Scotland's absence from the 1930, 1934 and 1938 World Cups make it very difficult to confidently say who was the best national team of the 1930s, as does Uruguay's refusal to attend the 1934 and 1938 finals after winning the inaugural 1930 World Cup on home soil. The argument for England in the 1930s is a strong one. Whilst Italy won the World Cup in dubious fashion in 1934 and in much more convincing fashion in 1938, they faced England 3 times during the 1930s, losing twice and drawing once. Italy had greats like Giuseppe Meazza and Silvio Piola, whilst England had stars such as Stanley Matthews, Ted Drake and later Tommy Lawton. Cases can be made for either, and if England had entered those 2 World Cups, we would know for sure, but on the grounds of their back-to-back World Cup wins, it's hard to overlook the Italians. An honourable mention must go to Austria's great but sadly short-lived Wunder team. 1940s. England. There is certainly a debate to be had in the 1930s, but less so in the 1940s, in Europe at least. Uruguay, Argentina and Brazil had all developed very gifted national teams by this point, but they seldom tried their hands against European opposition. The Second World War prevented a World Cup tournament from taking place in the 1940s, and Europe's 2 finest national teams were once again England and Italy. They only played each other once, in 1948, which was the finest starting 11 England have ever assembled. Stanley Matthews, Tom Finney, Neil Franklin, Billy Wright, Frank Swift, Tommy Lawton, the list just goes on and on. England won 4-0 against the Italians in Turin in a victory that stunned the continent, and they have to take this one. 1950s. Hungary. The World Cup was back with a bang in the 1950s, with 3 tournaments in 1950, 1954 and 1958. Hungary didn't win any of them, so you can be forgiven for wondering what on earth they were doing ahead of Uruguay, West Germany and Brazil. However, between 1949 and 1956, Hungary were undoubtedly the best national team on the planet. They may well have won the 1950 World Cup if the Hungarian government could have afforded to get the team all the way to Brazil, and their loss in the 1954 final was either a sheer fluke, terrible misfortune, or the result of some shady underhand tactics, depending on which claims you believe. Over 6 years, Hungary's golden team played 50 games, and the 1954 World Cup final was the only game they lost. The side began to fall apart in 1956 as star players like Sandor Kocsis, Zoltan Skibor and Ferenc Puskás made moves to Spain, but as both a team and as individuals, Hungary have to take top spot for the 1950s. 1960s. Brazil. The Brazil team of the 1958 and 1962 World Cups is the greatest national team of all time as far as I'm concerned, but Brazil's crown as the best national team in the 1960s is a little less set in stone. La Seleção comfortably won the World Cup in 1962, but went out in the group stages in 1966 as England won their first and only World Cup. That might all have been very different were it not for an injury to Pelé though, and when you look at Brazil's team across those 10 years, it's hard to argue against them being the defining national team of the decade. 1970s. The Netherlands. It's a straight shootout between West Germany and the Netherlands in the 1970s as far as I'm concerned, and whilst West Germany's 1970-74 side beat the Netherlands' 1974-78 outfit in my list of the 7 greatest national teams of all time, across the decade as a whole, I feel the crown has to go to the Dutch. Although they won nothing, they reached the finals of the 1974 and 1978 World Cups and the semi-final of Euro 1976. Playing a beautiful brand of carousel-style football, the Netherlands had stars like Piet Keizer, Ruud Krol and Johan Neeskens. Oh, and another rather famous Johan as well. 1980s. France. The 2 World Cups that took place in the 1980s were won by Italy and Argentina, but neither were particularly dominant throughout the decade as a whole. Over the 10 years, France played some of the best football and were one of the most consistent sides on the planet. With Michel Platini as their talisman, Les Bleus reached the semi-finals of both the 82 and 86 World Cups, as well as winning their first major trophy at Euro 84. 1990s. Brazil. No team really dominated the 1990s, as West Germany won Italia 90, Brazil won in the USA in 94, and France won their first World Cup on home soil in 98. Having said that, Brazil are the outstanding candidates, having also reached the final in 98, a game which may have been very different had their starman Ronaldo not suffered a fit pre-match. As well as Ronaldo, Brazil had players like Dunga, Romario, Roberto Carlos and Rivaldo at their disposal in the 1990s, and they also won 1 Confederations Cup and a couple of Copa Americas over the period. 2000s. Brazil. Once again, there was no all-conquering force during the 2000s. The 2 outstanding candidates are Brazil and Italy, and not just because they won the 2 World Cups of the decade. Brazil were scintillating in South Korea and Japan in 2002 as the 3Rs ran rampage against the world's defenders. They were disappointing in 2006 though, as an incredibly talented but aging squad was knocked out by France in the quarters. Italy won the 2006 World Cup despite having been unfancy going into the finals and having suffered what they felt was an injustice against one of the home nations in the round of 16 in 2002. With the likes of Gigi Buffon, Paolo Maldini, Alessandro Nesta, Fabio Cannavaro, Andrea Pirlo and Francesco Totti, Italy had a star-studded squad during the 2000s, but had just edged towards Brazil. 2010s. Spain. The final decade in this seven, and the one we are just 4 months from completing, the 2010s, is also arguably the hardest decade in this entire video to pick a winner for. Spain were completely untouchable from 2008 to 2012, although obviously, only 2 of those years fall within the decade in question. Germany were perhaps the most consistent nation, reaching the World Cup semis in 2010 and winning the tournament in 2014, but they sure crashed down back hard to earth in 2018. France deserve a mention for reaching the final of Euro 2016 and winning the 2018 World Cup, but ultimately, without an outstanding candidate, I have to go with Spain. Although they lack consistency, they still won 2 major trophies in the 2010s, and they won them in style. With the likes of Iker Casillas, Carlos Puyol, Sergio Busquets, Xavi, Andres Iniesta and David Villa, they also had some wonderful individuals and played a memorable brand of football. It's a close run thing, but I have to go with them. Looking back over the 150-year period as a whole, with 15 decades in total, England, Scotland and Brazil are all tied on 3 selections each. Although given the lack of competition for some of the early decades, Brazil's 3 are probably a little more impressive. No other nation features more than once. That's it for today's video. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Since you've got this far and in exchange for eternal good luck and happiness, why not subscribe and turn on notifications for the ever-brilliant HITC Sevens. Also, for mobile users, if you click on your screen now there should be some suggestions of other videos YouTube thinks you might like. And I agree with YouTube. If you're watching on desktop, they should appear of their own accord. Thank you all for watching, give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a brilliant day.